Chapter 75, A Walking A-Bomb. People stepped off the sidewalk to avoid me as I walked through the streets of Berlin. I like to think it was the angry aura around me, the clenched fists that told them not to bump into me or there'd be a fight. That I was a walking atomic bomb, ready to go off and level this stinking city any second. The truth was, of course, it was the uniform that made them scared, but I pretended they could feel the rage coming off of me in waves. Like I could warp the world with my fury. I wished I could. Turn in Simon? Send my parents on the run? How could they really think that that was the answer? How did they really think that I could do that? I had to find another way to get on that team. My feet took me to Fritz's house before I even understood my idea. It wasn't a particularly good idea, but it was all I could think of. All that made it through the white noise of outrage screaming in my head like an air raid siren. Fritz was the answer. He had to be. He and I were friends, sort of, or we had been friends once. Briefly. True, over the past couple of weeks we'd grown apart, and not just because he'd been spending most of his free time with the science team. It was more than that. Fritz was changing, becoming something different, something I didn't like. But that boy who'd asked me to help him be stronger, that boy who'd helped me be stronger, the boy who'd dragged me upstairs to share his detective novels with me, that boy, that friend had to be in there somewhere. And that friend would see the light. That friend would help me save the scientist. Fritz's sister, Lena, met me at the door. "Hello, future wife," I said. "Is my future brother-in-law at home?" Lena didn't say a word, but opened the door wider for me to come inside. She pointed not upstairs where Fritz's room was, but down the first floor hallway to the back of the house. I went down the hall to the kitchen at the back of the house, but Fritz wasn't there. I sniffed. I thought I smelled smoke, but the oven wasn't on and there was nothing on the stove. I caught a glimpse of a dark gray cloud curling into the sky through the window in the back door, and I stepped outside. Fritz was in the backyard, throwing his collection of detective novels into a bucket full of flames. Chapter 76, Boy Men. I threw myself across the yard, grabbing the book in Fritz's hand. "What are you doing? Stop!" I cried. Half of his collection was already burning in the bucket. Fritz yanked the book back from me and tried to hold it over his head where I couldn't reach it, but I was taller than he was. I snatched at the book and we wrestled over it for a few desperate seconds until at last I had it. I was about to ask him again what the bloody hell he thought he was doing when he punched me in the nose. It was fast and straight, and his feet were planted just right, and I'd never seen it coming. All the things that I had taught him to do, I staggered back, lost my footing, and fell on my butt. I pulled a hand to my nose, and it came away with blood. Fritz stood over me, a look of fierce cruelty in his knitted eyebrows, and suddenly I understood why Fritz wanted me to teach him how to fight, why he'd been so desperate to join the SRD. All of his life, Fritz had been the boy with the bloody nose, sitting there on the ground, looking up at the bully who'd beaten him. He'd joined the SRD so he could become the bully himself, just like little Hitler. "So this is what it's come to," I said. I didn't get up. I didn't want to fight Fritz. That's not why I was here. "You'd burn these books," I said, and I hurled the book I'd taken back at him, and he batted it away. "You'd burden something you love just to be on top for once in your life, even if it means turning your back on who you are?" Fritz tugged at his SRD uniform. "This is who I am. I'm going to lead Germany into the future. I'm going to help Hitler rule the world. But to do that, I have to make sacrifices," he said, quoting the Führer back to me. "You've burned books too. You made me burn books that day the other boys attacked me. I told you to burn those books so the other boys wouldn't kill you." "No," Fritz said. He picked up the book that I had thrown at him. "They were right. This is degenerate filth. I should never have read it to begin with, and neither should you. A good Nazi doesn't need books or philosophy or art. We think with our blood." "You think with your blood?" I said. "What does that even mean? How is that even possible?" Fritz threw the book at me, but I ducked it. "You've never taken any of this seriously, Michael. You've always treated this like a game. Maybe it's because you're not German, but this isn't a game. It's real." It was strange hearing the things that I had just been saying to myself come from Fritz's lips. It was as though I suddenly stepped outside of myself and saw me sitting there on the ground at Fritz's feet. We were just 13, me and Fritz, but we didn't look like boys anymore. Nazi Germany, the war, Hitler Youth, All of it had made us into men. Not man gods, as Hitler said, but boy men. Boys whose insides, whose hearts and minds and souls had been forced to grow up faster than our bodies. The war had made us men, and it was time to act like it. I took a deep breath. My parents are spies, I said. Chapter 77, All In. I felt lightheaded as I said it, hollow, like it was some dream version of me, something that would go away when I woke up. Fritz froze. What? I wet my dry lips. You're right. It's time for me to stop playing games, to commit myself completely. It's time I told the truth. My parents are spies. They're harboring a British airman, the one we were searching for in the countryside. They're hiding him until they can get him out of the country. Fritz staggered back, the black smoke from the burning books swirling around him. Where? I don't know, I lied, but they're moving him tonight. You have to tell the Gestapo. I'll find out when and where, and I'll lead them there. Fritz blinked in amazement. His eyes went elsewhere as he considered all of this, and then finally found my face. When they did, the anger was gone, replaced by something like admiration? Awe, maybe? He offered me his hand to help me up, and I took it. We were friends again, and I was the boy who denounced his parents to the Nazis. There was only one thing left to do. Chapter 78, How to Take a Beating, Part 2. I caught Horst later that day coming home from the overage movie that he'd snuck into at the cinema. I knew I could beat Horst in a fair fight, but it wasn't going to be a fair fight. I hurried up behind him, threw a flour sack over his head, and kicked him in the back of the knee. He went down hard on the sidewalk, and before he could tear the sack off of his head and see who attacked him, I kicked him hard, right in the ribs. I heard something crack, and he screamed and doubled over. A quick German look told me we were still alone, and I kicked him again and again. His arms, his legs, his chest, his head. He'd had this coming ever since he'd been our young Volk leader. Ever since he'd let the bigger boys pound the smaller boys for fun. Ever since he'd put me and Fritz in the ring together and told him to keep getting up. Ever since he'd beaten that Edelweiss pirate to within an inch of his life. I gave Horst the beatdown that he'd delivered to so many other boys. The beatdown I wanted the Allies to give to that bully, Adolf Hitler. I kicked him, and I kicked him, and I kicked him until he didn't scream anymore. He didn't moan. He didn't move. He was still alive when I was finished, but just barely. I dipped 2 fingers in the blood that was pooling on the sidewalk underneath him, and on the wall above his broken body, I drew a picture of an Edelweiss. Chapter 79, Tonight. I led my parents into Dad's study when I got home and pulled Simon out of the hidden room. We have to do it tonight, I told him. This time my voice didn't crack. There's been an opening on the science team. Chapter 80, Owls in the Night. It was colder that night, as if winter had given spring a thrashing that would lay it up in the hospital for another month. I stamped my feet and buried my hands in the heavy overcoat I wore. It was even colder by the river Spree, on the pedestrian path beneath the Mulkey Bridge. There was no Fußgängers down there tonight, no footgoers, not officially. It was after curfew. Everyone but the SRD and the Gestapo were supposed to be shut up tight in their homes. A dozen of us waited in the shadows, owls in the night, waiting for our prey to emerge. Our steamy breaths made faint gray clouds in the darkness. Where's Horst? I whispered to Fritz. Ottmar and Erhard had been there when we set out from the Gestapo station, but not the fourth musketeer. The pirates got him, Fritz growled. I nodded. Not that Fritz or anyone else could see me, which let me smile a little in the darkness. The smile quickly faded, though. I was far too nervous about what was about to happen to enjoy my easy victory over donkey-faced Horst. We heard a step on the cement path under the bridge, and the breathing around me stopped as we all strained our ears to listen. A whisper. Words I couldn't understand, the sound of scuffling feet. Whoever it was, they were coming our way. The wait was agonizing. My stomach did somersaults. Was this Simon? Or had he unwittingly scheduled this little piece of theater in the same place on the same night that some family was trying to escape? Some Edelweiss pirates were attempting an act of vandalism? And if it was Simon, would the SS shoot first and ask questions later? Would he be sent to a concentration camp? What if this nervous sweat rolling down my back made the tape around my waist come loose? and the blueprints for Projekt 1065 slipped out of my shirt. What if the Nazis still didn't pick me up for the team after I'd turned Simon and my parents in? A flashlight clicked once, catching Simon full in the face. He looked genuinely startled. He flinched as if to run, but another flashlight clicked on, and another. And Simon blinked and raised his hands against the light that held him in place. It was obvious there were too many of us for him to run away. Simon was caught. Chapter 81. Knowing what's to come. Where are your parents? SS Obersturmführer Trombauer asked me. I don't know. They were supposed to be with him, I said, giving the answer my mother and father had prepared for me. The embassy. Go. Go, Trombauer said, dispatching some of his soldiers. Find them. I held my breath as the soldiers ran off in the night. I prayed my parents wouldn't be caught. They should already have been gone from the city hours ago, but it was a long way from Berlin to Dublin, and they would have very few allies along the way. SS Obersturmführer Trombauer walked up close to Simon, who was being held by two SS men. Simon wasn't squirming or trying to get away. You should know it was the O'Shaughnessy's son who turned you in. Turned in his parents, too, Trombauer said with unmitigated delight. It wasn't enough that he'd caught Simon. He wanted to rub my betrayal in his face. Michael, Simon said, searching the darkness. Michael, say it isn't so. The heartbreak in his voice was so real, I thought my own heart would explode. How could anybody do this to somebody else? I had a part to play, though, or else this whole thing would be for nothing. I pushed through the other SRD boys into the darkness and stepped into the light. You're an enemy of the state, I told Simon, my voice shaky, and my parents broke the laws of Germany, hiding you. But even worse, they broke the laws of human nature. They betrayed the Aryan race by hiding a Jew, I said. The words like an insult, like profanity. How can you say that? Simon asked. How can you believe any of it? I stood taller, making sure the flashlight caught my puffed up chest, my upturned chin. Because I belong to Hitler now. I can see that you do, Simon said. Well, if you belong to Hitler, why don't you go to him? Go to the devil. One of the soldiers slammed the stock of his rifle into Simon's stomach. Simon doubled over in pain, and I had to resist crying out for the soldier to stop. I did my best to hold back my tears. The boy in me was scared for what was going to happen to Simon now, scared to be on my own for the first time in my life. I took a deep breath and tried to remember to be a man. I wonder, Michael, Simon said, still hunched over in pain. Did you ever hear the one about the Englishman, the Irishman, and the Scotsman who were all lined up in front of a firing squad? I couldn't believe Simon was telling jokes here, now. I didn't even have a chance to stammer a response before he went on. The lads are told they each can have a final request. The Scotsman says, I'd like to hear Scotland the Brave played on the bagpipes before I'm shot, to remind me of the old country. And the Irishman says, I'd like to hear Danny Boy sung by Gracie Fields before I'm shot, to remind me of the old country. So knowing what's to come, the Englishman says, I'd like to be shot first. Simon yanked himself free, decked the SS man closest to him, and sprinted down the tunnel. Whistles blew, people shouted, shots rang out. Simon fell. Without thinking, I ran to him, but luckily others did too. One of the SS was already kneeling down beside him when I got there. He's dead, I said. 82. Anything and everything. He died while trying to escape. There was almost happiness in SS Obersturmführer Trombauer's voice as he said it. One more dead Jew, and an enemy soldier to boot. No sucker punch, no broken bone had ever hurt so much as this. My knees went weak, like I was up on the rooftop with Simon all over again. The bombs exploding all around us. It was all I could do to stay on my feet, to not double over and sob like a baby. I couldn't keep the tears from streaming down my face, though, and I turned away so no one could see. Simon had meant to do this all along, I realized. As soon as he suggested I turn him in, he planned to get shot, to die trying to escape rather than be taken alive by the Nazis. He knew what was to come, even if he pretended it didn't matter. If they took him alive, they would torture him, and eventually he'd tell them about stealing the plans for Projekt 1065. Maybe even tell them about me and how I had helped him. He died to protect me, to protect his mission. Committed suicide by Nazi. Now they couldn't torture Simon Cohen, and he couldn't reveal any secrets because Simon Cohen was dead. Why do you cry? SS Obersturmführer Trombauer asked. shining his light in my face. I hurriedly wiped away my tears. I can't believe my parents threw their lives away for this filth, I said, thinking fast. I can't believe they didn't see that he who serves the Führer serves Germany, and whoever serves Germany serves God. It was Nazi claptrap propaganda, but SS Obersturmführer Trompenbauer nodded with approval. He put a comforting hand on my shoulder. It was all I could do not to flinch away from it. You have done well, Michael, SS Obersturmführer Trompenbauer told me. Very well. You've done more for Hitler tonight than most men twice your age. He called Fritz and Ottmar and Erdhard over with a flick of his head, and I tried not to watch as Simon's body was dragged away by the others. In fact, SS Obersturmführer Trompenbauer said, I'm in charge of training a select group of young men, such as yourself, for a very special mission for the Führer, and we have an open position on the team. He nodded at Fritz. Quetz here has suggested you for the job. I quite agree with his recommendation. Fritz smiled. I would have too if I hadn't just watched Simon gunned down in cold blood. I thought of my parents somewhere out there in the cold, dark night on the run from the Nazis. At least it hadn't been for nothing. I would give anything and everything to be on that team, I told SS Obersturmführer Trompenbauer, and I already had. Chapter 83, 8,422 feet. The cable car jumped and juddered as it went over one of the pylons that supported it during its 4,000-foot climb. I closed my eyes and gripped the metal bench so hard it left deep lines in my skin. I felt lightheaded, and not just because of the thin air in the Swiss Alps. Standing at the base of the aerial tramway in Murin, I had watched the tiny little cable cars as they moved up and down the mountain, hanging from spiderweb-thin cables that snaked up into the snow-capped peaks above us. Now I was inside one of those little trams, dangling 100 feet over a sea of green fir trees and white snow. Not that I was looking out the window. I think I can see my house from here, Ottmar said. He and Erhard both ran back and forth across the cabin, weaving between the other passengers for the best views. I wished that they would be still. Every time they moved from one side to the other, I could feel the cabin sway left to right, right to left. Is your friend going to be all right? A woman asked Fritz, who sat beside me. He looks a little green. Something he ate, Fritz said. And all this time, he was still covering for me, still helping me hide the fact that I was deathly afraid of heights. I was better with heights now than I ever had been, able to actually step in onto a cable car I knew was about to climb up the second half of an 8,420-foot tall mountain, for example, but only because of the work I had done with Simon. Simon. And whenever I closed my eyes, all I could see was him looking up at me, punching an SS officer, running, twisting as the bullets hit him, and falling. I saw it play out in my head over and over again, like pieces of a broken film. Why did you have to do it, Simon? Surely there had to have been some other way. I wrenched my eyes open. The brilliant blue of the alpine sky glared back at me through the windows. So many windows. And I quickly stared at the floor. I had to ignore what I knew lay just outside the walls and the floor of the cabin. Space, empty air, nothing. An Irishman, a Scotsman, and an Englishman apply for a chauffeur's job, I thought, trying to distract myself, remembering Simon. I'm such a good driver, I can go within 6 inches of a cliff and not drive off, said the Scotsman. I'm such a good driver, I can go within an inch of a cliff and not drive off, said the Englishman. Oh yeah, says the Irishman. Well, I'm such a good driver, I stay as far away from the cliffs as I can. The long arm atop the cable car rumbled across another pylon, and I put my hand to my mouth for fear I'd puke all over the lady standing in front of us. That which doesn't destroy us makes us stronger, Fritz said, quoting an old German philosopher the Nazis loved. The last thing I needed right now was Nazi platitudes, but I nodded. I had to keep playing the part of a zealous Hitler youth for a little while longer, anyway. There it is, someone said at last. The resort. Chapter 84, The Waiting Snake. The Edelweiss Resort clung to the side of a mountain, a few hundred feet below the peak. Its spindly-looking wooden pillars supporting decks that stuck out into the air. It was all golden brown wood and soft glowing lights and pointy A-frame roofs, covered with windows and terraces that offered guests incredible sweeping, long-distance views of the valley far below. Basically, it was an acrophobe's worst nightmare. My legs wobbled as I left the car, but I was glad to be back on solid ground, even if that solid ground was 8,000 feet in the air. I kept my back to the view and my eyes on the resort, where all of the passengers were queuing up in the Vorstellschlange, which means waiting snake, German for a long line, and through the security. The Swiss soldiers at the door were going through the bags of each of the attendees and patting each of them down for weapons, I guess, though one man was in full dress uniform of his country, and I didn't recognize what of a country I didn't recognize was let through with the sword on his belt. They were searching for guns then. Guns and explosives. I glanced at Fritz and the other two boys. Each of us carried 2 cases, one with our clothes and another with the scientific equipment to assemble our fake science projects. To attend the conference, we were posing as junior scientists, and the kits were our cover. I had no idea what the plan was, how we were supposed to assassinate Professor Goldschmidt. Only Ottmar knew the plan, which he promised he would tell us when we got to the resort. Did he carry a rifle in his second suitcase? A bomb? If the Swiss guards at the door discovered the weapon we were to use to kill Professor Goldschmidt, if they caught us and sent us back to Germany with our tails between our legs, then my job would be done for me. My parents, Simon, would have sacrificed themselves for nothing. But the professor would be safe, and that's what mattered now. I was worried about the plans for Project 1065 taped around my stomach. One simple pat to the side of my body, and the guards would feel the tape there, open my shirt, reveal the jet fighter plans that I was still carrying. They might not care that I was hiding papers on my body, but Ottmar and Erhard and Fritz would care. I would never leave this resort with the plans if I left the resort alive at all. The waiting snake slithered closer to the Swiss guards at the door, and the plans felt like a stone hanging around my waist. I'd had to get rid of the papers before we went through security. I had to put them somewhere safe where I could retrieve them on the way out. A low stone wall separated the aerial tramway station from the small plaza where we waited. The cable car was the only way out of the resort, the only way down the mountain. I'll be right back, I told Fritz, Ottmar, and Erhard. I broke away from the line and went behind the low wall. I felt along it for a loose stone and finally found one about the right size. I would hide the plans there, in the stone wall, where they would be safe from snow and Nazi assassins and Swiss guards, and then I would come back for them on the way to the cable car when I was leaving. I had to duck, not to be seen over the low wall. I unbuttoned my shirt enough to reach inside. I undid the medical tape Mom had given me to strap the plans to my skin. At last they were free, and I pulled out the thick packet of papers. "What are you doing?" a voice asked. Chapter 85, A Thorough Security Check. I was so surprised I nearly jumped off the mountain. It was Fritz. He was staring down at me from the other side of the wall. I hastily stuffed the jet plans back inside my shirt and kept my hand there, bent double to hide them. Had Fritz seen me pull them out? "I still feel sick from the cable car ride," I told Fritz, which was truer than I wanted to admit. "I just came back here in case I needed to throw up, so the others wouldn't see. Will you cover for me?" "Of course," Fritz said. "Take whatever time you need." Fritz disappeared, and I let out a breath that I'd been holding. My heart was still racing from the scare, and my fingers fumbled with the packet as I withdrew it again. I pulled the stone from the wall, worked the plans as far inside the hole as I could, and wedged the stone back into place. It stuck a few inches out from the wall, making it pretty easy to find again. I came back to Fritz, Ottmar, and Erhard just as they reached the Swiss guards at the door. The Swiss wore gray uniforms with red collars, signifying their rank. But where other countries would use stars, the little pips were shaped like Edelweiss. "You're fine to go through," the Swiss guard said at the door, waving us inside without checking our bags or patting us down. I couldn't believe it. They were just going to let us through? Because what, we were children? It was like Mom had told me. Women and children make terrific spies because people always underestimate us. So this was why the Nazis sent boys to do the work of men. Did no one have any idea what monsters the Hitler Youth were? What we were capable of? What we had been training to do since we were 10? They didn't even take our daggers from us. "Wait, you're not gonna," I started to say, but Ottmar pulled me through the door with the rest of them, and we were inside. Fritz murmured something to Ottmar, who nodded and sent Fritz on some assignment. I looked around for another Swiss soldier. They were all over the resort. I had to get word to one of them and let them know what was happening. They then could search our bags and see why the team had been sent. I headed for a blonde guard in the lobby. Ottmeyer grabbed my shirt and pulled me back. No wandering, he said. Let's get to our room. It's time to set up our experiment. Okay, guys, that's all I'm reading for today. We are 2 sections from the end, so this is getting really good. So thanks for tuning in.